We doing everything they talk about. You know I'm everything a boss about. Not putting work and gotta toss them out. I'm really biting, they just barking out. I'm really riding, they just parking now. His street, what to talk about. See the big H when I'm walking out. Yeah.
Here we go. Athletes Forum Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in, coming back, and subscribing to the channel. Drop a comment. Let me know what you guys think. Per usual, shout out to the locker room. That's you guys keeping the debates, everything conversational in the comments, and you know how we like it. Let's talk some ball. So the rankings drop. Right, the rankings dropped. We finally have our teams in terms of the format. You know what we would see in the playoffs if it were to happen this week. Never overreact with the first rankings. There's still a lot that's going to change, but there are some interesting things, and we're going to talk about 5 things that came to mind when the rankings drop. So, if you think of anything along the way, drop a comment. What came to mind when you thought about the rankings? What are your thoughts on the rankings? What are your thoughts on what I'm about to present to you guys? You know, let's chop it up and have this healthy conversation and debate. All right. So first thing we want to dive into, obviously, Oregon number 1, Georgia 2, Miami 3, BYU 4. You got Boise State the 5th non-conference. They got the 12th seed, and then there's some matches in between, which are some great matches too. Like, just think about it. You would get like a Notre Dame going to a Penn State potential whiteout night game situation. You get Indiana, Tennessee. Is Indiana real? Is, you know, how good is Tennessee? Obviously playing in the SEC. You know, we'll see. But let's dive into it. First thing I want to talk about, evaluating the losses. So it was clear looking at this that they evaluated Georgia's loss to Alabama compared to Ohio State's loss to Oregon. Obviously, Ohio State 1-point loss to the number 1 team in the country. Georgia lost to Alabama. Then we saw what happened to Bama along the way. Ended up losing to Vanderbilt. They ended up losing to Tennessee. Georgia ends up beating Texas, but hasn't looked good, obviously, this past weekend played Florida. So they're evaluating the losses. So it's going to be important, obviously, when you lose, how you lose, what it looks like, what that opponent looks like later in going down the season. Because obviously Notre Dame beat Texas A&M week 1. Texas A&M gone on a tear, but then they lost, so that's taking a little bit of stain, you know, from that win a little bit. Now we'll see what Texas A&M becomes, but it's interesting. But if you're going to evaluate losses, what about Boise State? What about Boise State losing to the number 1 team only by 3 points? And they're still a 12 seed. I know what everyone's going to say. They don't play a tough schedule, whatever. They went toe-to-toe with the number 1 team in the country and lost by 3 points. Will it happen if they play again? Who knows? But if you're going to evaluate losses, you got to take that into play. So that's one thing that stuck out with what the committee did. Boise State definitely should have got more credit. If anything, they should have been higher up. But, you know, that's the disadvantage of playing, you know, for a school like Boise State. Number 2, Indiana's playing with house money. Obviously, they cracked the top 10. They're undefeated. This is why I think they're playing with house money. If they win out, they're in. They essentially control their own destiny. They win out, they're in. Even if they go to the Big Ten championship and lose, they're still in, right? The runner-ups for the Big Ten and SEC championships are going to be in my opinion. Now, Indiana, the reason why I think they're playing with house money, there's no way I think you're dropping out of the top 12 if you lose a close game to Ohio State. Now, if it's a blowout, that's different, but you lose a close game to Ohio State, I think you're still in some way, somehow. I think you're still in some way, somehow. That's why I think Indiana's playing with house money, because that's that one big. They beat Ohio State, they're in. They're in. Obviously, Ohio State being Penn State helped them because now they're 1-2 with Oregon for the Big Ten. But they beat Ohio State, they're in. So that game just got even more intensified. But I think Indiana is a team that is playing with house money in terms of where they currently are ranked at now. People are going to say they got disrespected. I don't think they got disrespected. Again, this is the first rankings. There's still a lot that's going to play out. It's easy for them. You beat Ohio State, you go to the Big Ten championship, you're in. Next. Notre Dame's going to be interesting. Obviously, great win versus Texas A&M week 1, but also probably the worst loss out of all these teams on the playoffs. And losing Northern Illinois, they outgained by like 120-some yards in that game. Notre Dame's going to be interesting because, again, let's just paint some scenarios. Let's say you have for some reason, a 2-loss Ohio State. Let's say for some reason you get a 1-loss Miami, 1-loss, BYU. Let's say Colorado or Iowa State comes into the mix in the Big 12. Notre Dame could get bumped out. They don't really play any credible games going down the stretch. They could get bumped out. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. There's still a lot of big games played, especially a lot of teams in the top 10, top 25 alone. But Notre Dame's in an interesting spot, and it's going to be interesting to see how they keep evaluating Notre Dame going forward. If they keep Notre Dame where they're at, I think they're setting Notre Dame up to get left out. If Notre Dame is bumping up in the rankings, that means they like Notre Dame, they respect their schedule, they're going to go forward. So we'll see. But again, locker room, let me know what you guys think. Drop a comment. Let me know what you guys think about, all these scenarios. 4. Miami and BYU are going to be an interesting dynamic. Let me paint the picture for you. Let's just say Miami and BYU go undefeated. They go to the championship game, Big 12 championship game, Iowa State, Colorado, whoever. Miami ACC championship game, let's just say right now, SMU, and they lose. Well, now you got SMU representing the ACC, and then you got whoever representing the Big 12. That's not BYU. But how far do you drop a BYU, or how far do you drop a Miami in the rankings, right? The rankings clearly showed you that they value SEC and Big Ten schools, but those two teams drop. There's no way those two teams do not make the playoffs. You can't be penalized for going to your conference championship game and losing, essentially, right? So that's why I mentioned before, Notre Dame could be interesting. I think they could possibly get bumped out. I think, if those two teams go to those championship games and lose, this whole thing's gonna get crazy. This whole thing is gonna get crazy because now you're looking at seedings where it's like, let's just say Oregon wins the Big Ten. Let's say Georgia wins the SEC. And again, we have Boise State, I think, would then get a 3 seed, right? Top 5 highest rated conference winners. And then you have SMU with a 4, and then the winner of the Big 12 with a 5. And now we're looking at like Ohio State. We're looking at Texas, Tennessee, Penn State, Indiana. My goodness, Notre Dame for the sake of argument. BYU, Miami is going to get interesting. It's going to get interesting. So that's why I think Miami, BYU can provide an interesting dynamic depending on how the rest of the season goes. Obviously, if they win out, it takes care of the business. But if those two teams lose, it's a bad time to lose. It's a bad time to lose. All right. And lastly, go Ducks, quack, quack. They're the best team in college football. Pass the eye test, pass the resume test. They're only getting better as the season goes on. Dan Lanning has those guys going. Go Ducks. There's not much to say there. So, again, that was the rankings that we have here. And as you can see, it can make things interesting. Now, one thing to point out as we continue to go down the season, there's going to be a lot of big matchups. We still got Ohio State, Indiana. We pointed that out, right? You still got Texas versus Texas A&M versus Texas. You got Colorado versus Texas Tech. You got Ole Miss versus Georgia, LSU, Alabama. All these teams are going to play each other in or out of spots eventually, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. But, hey, locker room, drop a comment. Let me know what you guys think. Comment below. Share with a friend. And, what do you guys think about the rankings? All right. Subscribe, like the video, share with a friend. Athletes Farm Podcast.